Thank you very much also, and also for having me here and for inviting me to this beautiful occasion. Two things before I start. Let me know in case you don't understand me, also acoustically. And then since the backgrounds, I've heard that the backgrounds for each participant is quite different. So in case you feel that some parts of the presentation were not clear, or if you have questions regarding any issue I presented, any technical issue, just ask me anything about the Q&A session after has plenty of time to clarify any kind of question related to the topic I will be speaking today. The presentation of today will somehow continue and my own research I did in my PhD on the reception of Constantine in Arabic historiography. I analyzed in that context different historiographical works between the 9th and the 14th, 15th century from Christian writers such as Agapius of Manbij or Eutychius of Alexandria till Ibn Khaldun, looking at how the historiographical tradition of Constantine was adapted, developed to, and adapted to the different political contexts. At that time of writing, I also focused on East Syriac historiography or on Nestorian historiography, focusing especially on the Chronicle of Sirt. I was not yet able to indulge in a discussion in another East Syriac historical composition, which I will focus on today, which is the Kitab al-Mijdal or Majdal, the Book of the Tower, which also originated at the beginning, which like the Chronicle of Sirt, also originated at the beginning of the 11th century. I have with me the two volume the two volume concerning the historiographical part of Kitab al-Majdal. I will later then also shortly present the whole structure of this encyclopedic work. Today I will be mainly focusing on the history section, putting into the focus of my presentation the role of the patriarch, of the head of the East Syrian Church or the Catholicos, as the representative institution of the Nestorian Church, as the dialogue partner of the caliphal court, and as a source of authority for within the Christian community in the Islamic world of the Abbasid time. And so I will now come to my presentation. Historiographical writing plays a significant role in shaping discourses on rule and political authority, as we know. Even in the absence of an explicit political theory, historical narrative articulate normative models of legitimate power through the selection, interpretation, and evaluation of past events. By portraying rulers as just or as tyrannical, historians implicitly define the criteria by which authority should be judged. Early Christian historians, writing in the tradition of Eusebius' ecclesiastical history, developed this mode of political reflection by evaluating Roman emperors through theological lenses, presenting their reigns as exemplar of divine favor or punishment. Arab Christian historians later adopted these strategies and adapted them to the Islamic context. They not only referred about Roman history, but they also referred about Islamic history. And so, while writing within a different political and religious framework, Christian Arab historians continue to assess political authority, and by this also caliphs and Islamic rulers, in terms of justice and the role in protecting Christian communities. Through such evaluations, Christian historians extended a tradition in which historical writing functioned as a discrete yet powerful medium for articulating expectations of rightful governance across changing imperial and confessional contexts. With this in mind, I would also like to approach the historiographical tradition that developed within East Syriac Christianity during the Abbasid period. This tradition gave expression to different compilations which arrange the history of East Syrian Christianity according to the succession of the Catholicoi of the East. The term compilation is representative here for an important feature in the transmission of historiographical knowledge. In fact, such compilation heavily rely on earlier compilations, which they epitomize, enlarge with new material, as required by the specific focus. Among such compilations, the Chronicle of Sirte is certainly the most studied one, since its edition and translation offered by Adaïcher at the beginning of the 20th century. And important monographs, such as that of Philippe Wood, greatly contributed to study and to analyze the role of this compilation in the wide spectrum of Arabic Christian literature. While the Chronicle of Sirte, however, encompassed the period of time up to the 11th century when it was composed, only the parts covering the periods from the 3rd to the 5th century and from the 5th century to the 7th century have been preserved in the two surviving manuscripts, which are accessible to us. This is not the case, however, for the historiographical compilation, which I would like to focus on in my present presentation, and which has been transmitted as the 5th part within the encyclopedic work of the Kitab al-Mijdal, or Book of the Tower. This historiographical section, in fact, covers the history of the patriarchs of the East from the time of the apostolic preaching, from the memorable time of Adai up to the 12th century, adding at the same time a wealth of historiographical material on the history of Roman and Persian Christianity, on the history of monasticism, of heresies within the East. Due to space constraints, it is beyond the scope of the presentation to examine the various hypotheses which have been proposed regarding the authorship of Kitab al-Majdal. It will suffice here to note that scholarly consensus established on the basis of Bo Holmberg's study attributes the encyclopedic compilation to Amr ibn al-Matta al-Tirhani and dates it to the 11th century, noting at the same time that the historiographical section continued to be updated in the following centuries, giving rise, therefore, to different reductions, which then caused a lot of problems of authorship and being at the origin of different hypotheses concerning the authorship of Kitab al-Majdal. As we can see, the structure of Kitab al-Majdal presents all the characteristics of an encyclopedic work. It covers all the aspects of knowledge which were of use or which were suitable for, or were meant to be suitable for Christians in the 11th century. The structure follows the metaphorical structure of a tower, presenting both philosophical proof about the existence of God, then bringing, explicating the main tenets of Christian doctrine and of Christian worship, and as well as on ethics and of religious practice. And in part 5, then it brings a historical narrative on the history of salvation and most importantly for us, on the history of the patriarchs of the East. Finally, then eventually it again comes back to cultic matters. And in the last section, it presents a long discussion about the relationship of Christian ethics or Christian theology with respect to the Mosaic law. So it discusses the place of the Old Testament and of the Mosaic law within Christian practice and within Christian doctrine. In this way, Kitab al-Majdal provides an invaluable source both for the cultural history of the Church of the East, but also with respect to the history section, an invaluable source for the history of the Church of the East Syriac Patriarchate in the early Islamic period, as well as a source for Christian-Muslim relations. It also offers a window into the world of the caliphal court, to which the patriarchs had access to by virtue of their representative role as head of the Christian community. In the first part of my presentation, I would like to highlight some of the most recurrent themes that characterize the portrayal of interaction between the Catholicos and the caliphs. Although much of the material is anecdotal and not always arranged in a coherent manner, it nevertheless reflects the way in which Christian historiographers, history writers, presented the caliphal court as a site of contention for ecclesiastical authority. In a second section of my presentation, time permitting, I would like then to argue that this climb to authority formulated by the patriarchs of the East, rooted in a historiographical narrative that capitalized on the historical lineage that linked the patriarch of the East to the apostolic origins. And here is what you can see here is one manuscript page from the Vatican with the beginning of section 5 of book 5, starting with the canons promulgated by the apostles. Come to point 1, the caliphal court as a site of ecclesiastical contention. Information on the background and tenure of the patriarchs of the East varies greatly according to the period in question and the source material to which the compilers had access to. Beginning with the Islamic period and particularly under the Abbasids, the accounts tend to follow a more consistent structure with similar thematic interest. Although the length of each chapter may still present variation from one patriarch to the other, one can find a similar interest in what was important for the tenure of a specific patriarch. Among the most recurrent themes, one can find information on the education of the Catholicos or on his monastic background, the modalities of their election and installation, the place where the patriarchs resided, and the conflicts caused by other contenders to the patriarchal seat. And we also find information on the principal political events that shaped the tenure of an individual patriarch, including the appointment of other bishops and other metropolitans under the authority of the Catholicos. And most importantly for us, the sections on the tenure of the patriarchs also provide a wide range of episodes relating to the interaction between the Catholicos and the Caliph, presenting an image of a caliphal court with all its actors, like the viziers, the secretaries, and also physicians who were active at the court and who interacted with the Catholicos. In this way, the history of the patriarchs provides an important window into the competitive culture of rivalry and defamation culture that could characterize the court life in early Islamic history, and an aspect which has been masterfully analyzed by Luke Yarbrough in his monograph, Friends of the Emir, Non-Muslim State Official in the Pre-Modern Islamic Thought. As he has shown in his monograph, a wide range of literary genres, from council literature to Prince Mirrors up to poetry literature, portrayed the court of the Caliph as a locus of personal rivalry and intrigue, contributing somehow to an image, to a kind of distorted image, one could also say, of the caliphal court culture, which also influenced modern scholarship on Abbasid political life. Also, Kitab al-Majdal offers vivid portrayals of conflict, rivalry, and also episodes of miraculous intervention, which characterize the interaction and the conflict between caliphs and patriarchs, contributing in this way to these literary conventions and to this portrayal of the Abbasid court, to which also their Muslim peers contributed with their literature. Presenting therefore the patriarch of the Church of the East as an authority which had to demonstrate his own resilience, navigating the complicated network of the Abbasid court. Reading through different sections covering Abbasid history, the reader is therefore informed on the names of the caliphs, their viziers, their secretaries, their Christian physicians, and especially Christian physicians make regular appearance in the course of the patriarchal history. The caliphs, as well as the Buyid and Seljuk emirs, are generally portrayed in positive light. They fulfill the role as protectors of the Christian community and as a first dialogue partner, interacting point for the Catholicos. An interesting aspect in this respect is the mention of diplomas by which the respective ruler could confirm the appointment of a singular Catholicos. In the case of the patriarchs Abdisho ibn al-Arid or Ibn al-Makicha, the redactor of Kitab al-Majdal even inserted the respective diplomas document in full length, and they show no hesitation in producing the full documents, which occupies dozen pages in the modern edition. Regardless of questions concerning the authenticity of such diplomas, they reflect the bureaucratic procedures of the caliphal chancery, including lengthy introductory sections intended to affirm the superiority of Islam over Christianity, the role of the caliph as a commander of the faithful and protector of the Christian community on the one hand, and on the other hand, they are meant to confirm the patriarch's privileges and duties towards both the Christian community and the Muslim ruler, especially with regard to the collection of taxes. There are, however, also some exceptions to this positive portrayal of Muslim rulers, particularly in those cases where caliphs sought to enforce the Pact of Umar and its dress code upon Christians, therefore provoking mass conversion from Christianity to Islam. Even in these instances, however, one can observe a certain reluctance to employ overly a harsh judgment against the Islamic rulers. Quite different, however, is the portrayal of the Christian court physicians, who are generally depicted as immoral and corrupt. To mention only two examples, Jibril ibn Bukhdishu is criticized by the famous patriarch Timothy for having taken concubines, thereby causing Jibril to insult the patriarch in front of the other bishops present. Later, when the physician fell from a horse and was injured, it was ironically the patriarch's prayer which healed the physician at court. Isa ibn Shahlafa, the personal physician of Caliph al-Mansur, is accused of having demanded the transfer of valuable objects from the church of Nisibis and of having imprisoned the patriarch of his time. This negative judgment is also echoed in other prosopographical works on physicians of their time. Writing some centuries later, but probably drawing on similar sources to those used by Kitab al-Majdal, Ibn Abi Usayba, in his biographical dictionary of physicians, report, for example, that the same Isa ibn Shakhlafa was obliged to move away from Grundashapur to move to Baghdad because his presence in the hospital of Grundashapur was considered to be detrimental to the hospital, and so he was obliged by his master Gilgis to come with him to Baghdad at the patriarchal at the court. However, the portrayal of the court physician also allow for a degree of ambiguity, particularly for those physicians who were more contemporary to the final reduction of the history of the patriarchs. This is especially true for Abul Faraj Said ibn Ibrahim al-Wasiti, an ordained minister who was at the same time the physician of the powerful Seljuk ruler Malik Shah and of the Caliph al-Mustathir. Indicative of the prominence that this physician enjoyed within the Christian community is the fact that the history of the patriarch also inserted an eulogy praising the physician for having persuaded the authorities the Christians should not be required to wear distinguishing marks on their clothing, according to the Pact of Umar. At the same time, this physician would also have demonstrated his humility by refusing the election to the office of Catholicos. On the other hand, the redactor of Kitab al-Majdal also dwells on conflicts between this physician and Catholicos Makija, and conflicts which gravitated around liturgical matters, and conflicts which eventually led to the excommunication of the physician and to a divine intervention by God, which caused the physician's loss of eyesight. So again, here the patriarch in his role as a miraculous worker who is more powerful than the physician present at the court of the caliph. The history of the patriarchs is not the only source reporting on the affairs of Christian physicians at the caliphal court. Before Kitab al-Majdal, both the now lost church history of Petium, the translator, and Ibn Addaya's Akhbar al-Atiba provided abundant material, which was used by the aforementioned historian Ibn Abi Uzayba in his biographical dictionary, Uyun al-Anba fi Tabaqat al-Atiba. His numerous accounts in which he describes how physicians were honored with gifts from the caliphs clearly illustrate that Christian physicians constituted an important political factor at court. By virtue of their direct access to the ruler and by virtue of the trust they enjoyed with the ruler, they also acted as important advisors and brokers of authority between the ruler and the Christian subjects. As noted above, with regard to al-Wasiti, Christian physicians could serve in this way as mediators between the Islamic rulers and the Christian community, securing, for example, exemptions for their co-religionists from the requirement to wear the distinctive signs of the dhimmis. However, as a consequence, therefore, the privileged position which Christian physicians implied in their role at the court also constituted a source of instability for the authority of the patriarch. Owing to their elevated status, they were able to intervene in the election of new patriarchs, imposing on the electing bishops the candidates who best suited their interest. In this way, the caliphal court became a challenging sea to navigate for the patriarch. In the following dispute, which I have brought, this image is a famous image of Ibn Bakhtishwar, one of his works in which they show also the social stance embodied by Christian physicians in opposite society. And the following dispute between Makija and the vizier of the caliph al-Mustashir can provide an instructive window into this regard, presenting how the authority of the caliph and of the Christian physician could be opposed to each other. The vizier summoned him, namely the patriarch, and said to him, you cannot oppose the commander of the faithful and offend his physician, namely Ibn Wasiti. The Catholicos, Mar Makicha, peace be upon his memory, said to him, he cannot offend me or oppose me in my actions, for I have power over him. The vizier said to him, if you do not accept him, you will have no employment in our land. The Catholicos then replied, even if I leave your land, what I command and forbid, what I loose and bind, remains exactly the same, regardless of the diploma you have written and drawn up for me. For this is a law and a covenant that I have received from heaven. If what you command and forbid extends for 20 parasangs, my authority reaches from east to west. As for that malicious person, namely Ibn Wasiti, he cannot pray without mentioning me. I am leaving. What the patriarch is here doing is also referring to the vast geographical area of his influence, which reached from Syria up to India, and therefore also went beyond the political, the sphere of influence of the Abbasid caliphs. While this claim to divinely sanctioned authority invoked by the patriarch is here expressed in terms of the geographical reach, there is, however, also a temporal dimension that merits attention, and that brings me to the second part of the presentation, namely the insertion and the use of Roman and Persian history as a source of authority, which demonstrates the lineage of ecclesiastical authority that linked the institute of the patriarchy to the apostolic origins. And coming to this aspect, there would be different issues which could be focused on the history of the apostolic preaching throughout the whole Middle East, the legend of King Abgar as a foundational myth to demonstrate in what way Christianity became radicated in the Syriac culture, and history of persecution inside the Persian context. In the following section, I would like to focus on Roman history and on the example of Constantine, and of the role of the history of Constantine and the history of Nicaea as a source of authority for the patriarchs of the East. An aspect which might sound like a paradox at the beginning, to begin with, if we consider that Persian East Syria Christianity developed outside the border of Roman Empire, with Philip, one could put this section under the headings, what has Persia to do with Rome? In fact, East Syriac historiography developed a long historiographical tradition, which also inserted Roman history into the history of the Persian Church, and the reception of the Council of Nicaea had much to do with it. And after all, it was the promotion of Christianity that took place under Constantine that could serve as a powerful reminder also for East Syria Christian about the capacity of the Christian faith to exert influence over imperial authority. And a long tradition, both a long historiographical and hagiographical tradition, developed also in the East Syrian context, that developed the different tradition on Constantine's conversion to Christianity, on the finding of the cross, and on the Council of Nicaea. What you can see here in the image is a folio of from the lectionary, from the East Syriac lectionary, with on this page present the biblical reading from the Feast of the Cross, and the miniatures present two of the events, of the episodes coming from the legend of the discovery of the cross. Constantine in bed with the dream of the cross, and then after sending Helena to Jerusalem, the Jewish inhabitants of Jerusalem then excavated the cross. These are episodes taken from the so-called legend of Judas Kyriakos, a Syriac legend, which included both the vision of the cross and the finding of the cross in Jerusalem into one narrative. Within East Syriac Christianity, there was a particular set of documents that had a particular importance for the reception of the Council of Nicaea within the East Syriac, within East Syriac historiography. And these documents are the so-called Syriac Acts of Marutha, a set of documents attributed to the 5th century Marutha of Maiferkat, a diplomat, a bishop, who had a great major role in convening one of the first East Syriac synods in the year 410. He is credited in East Syriac historiography, he is credited with the translation of many Nicene canons and Nicene materials into Syriac, an episode which proved fundamental for the reception of Nicaea into the Persian context. Among the acts ascribed to Marutha of Maiferkat, one can find an alternative legend on Constantine and on his mother Helena, the history of how he convened the Synod of Nicaea, and a set of Syriac canons attributed to the fathers of Nicaea, which would then have been translated into Syriac and adapted to the reality of the East Syriac Church. They have been made accessible to us through an edition of Arthur Wöbus. And translated as well into English. The reason why I'm mentioning Marutha is because all East Syriac compilations, including Kitab al-Majdal, they follow the narrative offered by the Acts of Marutha. They attribute the convocation of the Council of Nicaea to the initiative of Constantine's mother Helena, who learned about the doctrinal divisions within Christianity on her journey to Jerusalem, leading his son to convene the synod at Nicaea. This led to a gathering multitude. The presentation is away, I think, among the multitude of no, the presentation is away, but I can continue speaking. Yes. Mm-hmm. Among the multitude of bishops who gathered at Nicaea, then only 318 agreed to sign their article of faith, led down by Alexander, the bishop of Jerusalem. The 318 bishops which were present and which signed the Creed of Nicaea were they all bore the marks of persecution, and Constantine publicly demonstrated his reverence for these bishops by kissing their wounds and placing his seat among them. The account is particularly eager to extol the example of a certain Thomas of Marash, whom the faithful had already believed to be dead. And Constantine's veneration of the bishop is then followed by another ritual gesture to which the Roman emperor symbolically invested them with his own authority. Constantine took his sword, his scepter, and his ring, which he had laid at their feet, saying, and he said to them, God has empowered you and granted you authority over the priesthood, while he has entrusted me with the dominion over the empire. But today he has bestowed upon you authority over both the priesthood and the empire. I am subject to you and will follow your commands. The significance of this narrative for the East Syriac Church did not go unnoticed by Muslim contemporary writers and polemicists. In particular, the polemicist Abd al-Jabbar al-Hamadani, who also wrote at the beginning of the 11th century, presents a brief account of the Council of Nicaea, which presents many similarities with the account offered by Marutha and by consequence by our historiographical compilations of the 11th century. His narrative follows a polemical interest, namely that of showing that it was Constantine who, through his intervention, altered and changed Christian dogma, falsifying it, and therefore alienating Christianity from the original teachings of Jesus. Here in Abd al-Jabbar, the involvement of imperial authority in matters of religion becomes for him an argument against Christianity. And I'm not going to read this passage. It's a famous one, but the individual details, motifs which he presents, are all to be found in our historiographical sections. Also, the names he mentions and the numbers he mentions in this case. While Abd al-Jabbar's interpretation can also is therefore addressed at Christianity, it can also be read as a part of an inner Muslim discourse on the relation between caliphal and religious authority, in particular within the context of the Mu'tazilite controversy, which heavily contributed to Islamic debates in that time. But for a Christian writer, such as the redactor of Kitab al-Mijdal, the Council of Nicaea and Constantine was not only of interest with a view to doctrinal matters, but also with a view to canonical matters. In fact, the Council of Nicaea was linked to a set of canon laws which were intended to regulate the discipline and hierarchical structure of the church. It was Marutha himself who justified. It were the acts of Marutha themselves who justified the writing and the transmission of Nicaea by saying that even outside the context of Roman Empire, Christians still needed some canons in order to regulate disciplinary matters. For what reason have we not translated all the canons from Greek into Syriac? For we are the disciples of the fathers of Nicaea in the heart and in the mouth, without doubt, and completely the entire corpus of their canons we transmit cheerfully. However, those of the rest we have not written because they are not urgent regarding their usefulness in the land of the Persians, as we have demonstrated above. And for this reason we have discarded them and have not written them down. However, for the countries of the Romans and of Glenon, of Mimida, of Purponion, of Lubion, and of the Laodiceans, of the Himyarites and of Kushaye, for these countries, these canons are useful, which we have discarded because their kings and judges and all the ranks and orders are Christians who are under the rule and subordinated to the canons of the fathers. Marutha is therefore making a difference between Christians living under Christian rule and Christians living under non-Christian rulers. And the claim of the Acts of Marutha is that of selecting those canons which are important for those Christians living under non-Christian rulers, namely the Persian rulers, and this facilitated also the transmission of the Acts of Marutha into Arabic for those Christians living now under Islamic rule. Therefore, there was also a legal authority and not just doctrinal authority that emanated from Nicaea and from Constantine. And the Acts of Marutha and their reception in the historiographical compilation gives proof to this. In fact, one of the major legal collections within East Syriac Christianity, the Synodical Orientale, obviously this is a the Latin title, also testifies to the important Nicaea had for the legal, for the history of the canon law inside East Syriac Christianity. Within the Synodicon Orientale, we find collected all church canon laws collected during the synods of the East Syriac Church between the 5th and the 8th century, which is why the Synodicon Orientale can be dated to the 8th century, so to the early Abbasid time. But it continued to be adapted with new canonical material. There was also one find in the expanded version of the Synodicon Orientale, also canonical collections related to family law and hereditary law attributed to the famous patriarch Timothy, who who also legiferated in these matters, making use of his role as representative of the Christian community. And at the same time, also the synods, the Synod of Nicaea and the canons attributed to Nicaea were introduced and added to this compilation. And on the basis of internal evidence, Lucas van Rompuy has suggested that the final redaction of the Synodicon Orientale goes back to the 11th century based on internal evidence. Therefore, the same period of time in which also the big historiographical compilations of the East Syriac Church originated. We can therefore see major enterprises of collecting materials, both with respect to legal material, with respect to historiographical material, and one would also add with respect to exegetical material. Ibn Tayyib, the famous East Syriac exegete, also lived at around that time. For this reason, also Kitab al-Mijdal is keen to cast in a positive light those patriarchs who are also remembered in the Synodicon Orientale for their legal initiatives. And also Kitab al-Mijdal similarly also emphasize those Catholic which contributed to the expansion of the administration of the patriarchal authority, focusing, for example, on the nomination of other bishops across the different area of the East Syriac Church. And it also is keen to collect and provide documents which would prove and demonstrate the role of the patriarch as the leading figure inside the Church of the East. For example, it provides a pseudo-epigraphic letter which the Western bishop allegedly sent to the Eastern bishop in the time of the persecutions during the 3rd century, in which the Western bishop would have confirmed the right of the Eastern bishop to nominate their own patriarch and so to secure their own autonomy. And this right to nominate their own patriarch is then again confirmed by one of the canons of Nicaea, obviously not the original canons of Nicaea, but those Syriac canons of Nicaea, which are formulated by Marutha. So the fact that this all brings me to the conclusion that Persian and Roman history in this way function as a source of authority for the patriarchal authority within the context of the disputes and conflicts present in the reality of Abbasid society. In a church in which the authority of the patriarch was heavily dependent on the goodwill of the Abbasid ruler and of his diploma, and in a time in when also other Christian actors, like for example physicians at the court, had a massive influence on the choice of patriarchs. In this time, the patriarchs needed to look for other forms and sources of authority by which they could fasten their own position, and history writing was one of them. And with this, I come to the conclusion, and I thank you for the attention, and I'm looking forward to your question and to suggestions and further aspects which maybe I have not focused on.